All right, want to welcome everyone to this Noahide class. Again, want to welcome everyone to this Noahide class. When last week we spoke, or 2 weeks ago, we spoke about Aver min HaChai, about eating a limb from a live animal and different repercussions of that. Now we're going to get into the amount of liability. When a person's liable, what the difference between kosher and non-kosher slaughter, and how that's going to affect, the non-Jew, how it's going to affect the Noahide. So again, we spoke about its application, this idea of Aver min HaChai, eating a limb of a live animal, right? That that we spoke of. We spoke about different ramifications, right, that we did. And now we're going to look at more fundamental prohibition, right? More fundamental of the prohibition over here in contemporary issues. So the question is, how much does a person have to eat from this Aver min HaChai, this limb from a live animal? The answer is, you don't need to eat very much, right? There's no minimal amount. Even the smallest amount that a person may eat, they transgress over here, right? That you're going to get punished for, even a small amount. But swallowing an entire living creature, let's say a creepy crawly thing, something like that, a bug or whatever, even though it's an entire living creature, for a Jew that would be forbidden because it's considered one entity, a whole entity. But by non-Jew, not. Because what are we talking about over here? We're talking about a meat from a living creature. So this is a debate, Gemara in Chulin, 102b, that according to Tosfos, they go like Rabbi Yehuda, eating an entire living creature is not forbidden. Rashi disagrees. The Rambam goes like Tosfos, that it's not forbidden. Right, that's for a non-Jew, not forbidden over here. So what's going on? What's the scope? What's the scope of this prohibition? Torah says, we saw last week, or 2 weeks ago, let's say better. What do we see 2 weeks ago? Torah says, Genesis chapter 9, verse 4. It says, but flesh with its soul, its blood you shouldn't eat. 100% the blood shouldn't eat. Rashi, and the Targum Yonason, the Aramaic translation from Yonason ben Uzziel, now makes an important observation. What is it talking about? Eating the flesh while the animal soul while it's still alive. Right? In other words, it's in the blood. The soul is in the blood. So what do the rabbis understand? They understood that the prohibition of Aver min HaChai is going to tell you it's going to be forbidden while the flesh is taken from the animal, it's still alive. Now, the question is going to be, what does it mean? What does it mean over here? It's still alive. So once the animal dies, if you eat the flesh taken from it, you're not liable. Right? It's dead. Ritual slaughter, we're going to see, doesn't need to be done for a non-Jew. We're not talking about, we're going to see what the ramifications of that are. But in general, if the animal's dead, you ate from the animal, not a problem. No matter how it was killed. But what do the rabbis tell us? If you remove the meat from the animal, it's still alive. Prohibit it. Forever. For all time. Even after the animal dies. Right? Why? Because once you took the limb while it's still alive, that's forbidden. I can tell me it now died, but that limb should be forbidden. Why? Because Gemara says, Gemara in Chulin 121b, tells me that flesh becomes detached from it. Let's say the flesh comes off while it is dying, not dead yet. Right? Maybe in the last throes of dying. We're not going to get gross here. Right? It's like the flesh detached from a living creature, therefore forbidden even if the animal dies. Right? The Talmud tells me, right, a little bit strange, the reasoning over here a little bit unclear. Many hold it's a rabbinic decree, but there's a debate over here how far it goes, how far the rabbinic decree applies to Noahides. Right, now this is not something that's clear cut. Right, let's make clear. Let's make clear. People talk a big game, and we always say we don't really care what they say. Right, the bigger they are, the harder they fall, so to speak. Right, we don't care what they say, but this is complex. This is a major complex idea. Whether rabbinic decrees apply to Noahides. Oh, I can keep kosher. Wink, wink. Oh, some people hold you can't keep kosher. Wink, wink. We say it's okay. Yeah. So even if you tell me it's a rabbinic decree, who says the rabbinic decree applies to Noahides? It's complex. Wink, wink. It's complex over here. Others take a more stricter approach, but everyone agrees the meat's prohibited, even after the animal has died. Why? Because you plucked the limb off before it died. So you're going to say, but it's only forbidden when the animal's alive. That's what we're going to say. What's the problem? The animal didn't die. It didn't die yet. Oh, you tell me the animal died? Right? The animal died over here, so what am I going to say? So I'm going to say over here, if the animal died, who cares if I plucked it before? Who cares if I cut off the limb before? The animal died. Should make it permissible. Oh, comes on the Talmud, says no. Because once I plucked the limb from the animal, while it's still alive, what do I care what happens now? I know the animal's going to die. That's the whole point. The animal is going to die. So what? How does that affect my limb right here? It's not going to. Once it's plucked from the animal, forbidden forever. Even after the animal dies. And that we're going to see. That we're going to come back to. Now, strict liability over here. What's strict liability? This is one of the 7 Noahide laws. They're liable for a death penalty. If you eat meat, whether from a land mammal, you remove it while it's still alive. You eat it while it's still alive. You eat it in the normal manner. Now, all other possible eatings, quote unquote, will not incur the death penalty. Still forbidden. So therefore, even if a person is not punished for eating the flesh taken from a bird, we're talking about a mammal, meat. Even though you tell me chicken is meat, true, but it's not considered red meat. So therefore, if you eat the flesh of a chicken before it died, it's okay. Right? You're not going to get, sorry. It's not okay. It's forbidden, but you're not going to get death penalty. You're not going to get death penalty, as the Rambam explains. In the commentaries of the Rambam. Laws of Kings, chapter 9, halacha 10. Now, there's going to be a major difference between Jewish law and what goes on for Jews and what goes on for Noahides when we're talking about this prohibition. We're talking about the prohibition of HaChai. For Jews, how do we permit meat for animals that are permitted? It's called shechita. What is shechita? It's ritual Jewish slaughter. Now, what does shechita do? When the animal dies, it removes the prohibition of HaChai. In other words, what do? You take the knife, very, very sharp knife. The ritual slaughter is going to come in, and he's going to puncture major area of the trachea and the esophagus. What's going to happen? Animal's going to die straight away. Right? Now imagine that there are a number of countries that have banned ritual slaughter, saying it's inhumane. I don't see how it's inhumane. It dies straight away. I would think, when we spoke about this before, shocking the animal, electric shock. Now, you're giving it a certain amount of juice. Right? You're stunning it so you can slaughter it. Boy, that's really humane. Fry its brain. Fry other parts of its body. Boy, can't even tell you how humane that is. Right? I don't think anyone wants to see it. You'll be a vegetarian after that. I mean, you might, if you see ritual slaughter, you might be a vegetarian anyway. Right? But in this case, you see it's being fried. How in the world is that more humane? Which just goes to show it has nothing to do about whether it's humane or not. Right? It's something that's anti-Semitic that they're saying. Now, once the majority in trachea, the majority of the trachea and esophagus has been severed, meaning it's going to die straight away. According to the Torah, prohibition of Eiver Min HaChai does not apply. Why not? Because the animal's dead. If I cut off a limb right now, right after I did this, totally permissible. Why? Because the animal is going to die. Animal is, let's say better, animal is dead. If the animal is dead, is there a problem of eating a limb from a live animal? No, he's dead. If I cut off the limb before, different issue. But here, the animal dies straight away. So a Jew can remove a limb or the meat from the animal, even if it's still in its death throes, because it's considered dead. We look at it as being dead. It's flapping around. Ain't going to flap for long. That's already considered death. So therefore, for a Jew, it's going to be permitted. Now, what does it mean it's going to be permitted? Only in respect to Eiver Min HaChai. But the reality is you can't eat from the animal till it dies. You have to wait till it dies, not considered dead, only in the sense for Eiver Min HaChai. For Eiver Min HaChai, then it becomes permitted. But you still, a Jew can't eat from it until it dies. So for Noah, prohibition of Eiver Min HaChai does not depart from the animal until it stops, until its heart stops beating. So here we're going to see the contradiction between Jewish and Noahide law. Right? What's our assumption over here? The Shulchan Aruch Harav, known as the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, says we assume that the motion and breath have stopped. Once the heart stops, we say it's dead. If the animal stopped moving and breathing, bled a lot, we can assume it's dead. We can assume that the heart has stopped. We don't need to, we don't have to get a big, the stethoscope over here, stick it on the heart, see if it's alive. We assume it's dead. Right? We assume it's dead over here. But there's a problem. There's a contradiction over here between Jewish law and Noahide law. What's contradiction? If an animal is slaughtered properly, according to Jewish law, once the animal, again, you hit the esophagus and the trachea, the animal's considered dead for all intents and purposes. Even if it's flapping around a little bit. It's still dead, considered dead. Therefore, a Jew can consume meat from that animal even before its last breath. Why? We mentioned before, it's dead. Then its last throes. But it's dead, considered dead. But the meat severed from the animal remains forbidden for a non-Jew. For a Noahide. Why? Because of Eiver Min HaChai. Why? So why? Why would it be different? Why is Noahide law different? Because Noahides don't rely upon ritual slaughter. Right? Go ask one of these super Noahides. Yeah, Noahides rely on ritual slaughter. We'll say, of course. We hold it to the highest degree. What are you, a fool? We don't hold by ritual slaughter over here. How does ritual slaughter apply to a non-Jew? Doesn't. Right? So Noahides, let's repeat that. Noahides don't rely upon ritual slaughter to remove the prohibition of Eiver Min HaChai. Ritual slaughter plays no role over here for them, in general. What do they rely on? Death of the animal. So, even though we hold, according to Jewish law, you hit the esophagus, you hit the trachea, for all intents and purposes, it's dead, even if the heart still beats. For Noahides, and so if you cut off a part of the animal, and you're going to eat it, for a Jew, that's okay. Why for Noahide it's not okay? Because they don't rely on ritual slaughter. Ritual slaughter doesn't do anything for them, for the prohibition of Eiver Min HaChai. What do they rely on? Death. Not a death row, death itself. The animal stops moving. Now you're going to note there's a problem. Right? There's a very significant problem over here. Right? If someone's going to say, come on, we all buy ritual slaughter, you have a major contradiction. They give a person a little bit of knowledge, it's dangerous. What's the contradiction? There's a general rule from the Talmud, which obviously these people don't know how to learn. And that is, Noahide law cannot be more prohibitive in scope than Torah law. In other words, for Jews, you're going to say, the animal's not dead yet, technically. We hold it's dead, you can eat the limb that's cut. For a non-Jew, no, we're stricter. We don't hold that. We hold you got to wait for the animal to die. What's the problem? How in the world can you have non-Jewish law, non-Jewish Torah law, be more strict than Torah law itself for Jews? How can the law be stricter for Noahides than for Jews? The Talmud says can't have such a thing. That's a huge problem. So the Talmud tells me in Chulin 121b, and many rabbinic authorities hold, notably the Shach, the Yerdea, Siman 27, that when a Jew slaughters meat for Jewish consumption, i.e. ritual slaughter, what does the ritual slaughter do? Removes the prohibition of Eiver min HaChai in its entirety. In totality, even for a non-Jew. Once the Jew kills the animal, ritually slaughters it, no problem for a Jew or a non-Jew, Eiver min HaChai. But, we always say there's got to be a but over here. It's got to meet certain conditions. One, it's got to be the slaughter of a kosher species. That should go without saying because a Jew can't eat. Can't slaughter something that's not kosher. What's he going to do? Ritually slaughter a pig? It's a contradiction in terms. Pig's not kosher. What are you doing? Or camel or rabbit or any of these things. That's the first thing. Second thing is it's got to be slaughtered by a qualified shochit, a ritual slaughter, according to all details of kosher shechita, which is extremely complex. So I can't tell you how many people I've heard that say, well, if I take the very sharp knife, I do it in my own backyard, is it considered kosher? No. That's easy. Why not? Because the laws of ritual slaughter are extremely complex. You have to learn under somebody, the laws themselves, then you got to get practice in doing it. But just because you think you know the laws, good luck. You also have to have a tremendous amount of fear of heaven. So I'm not going to say non-Jews don't have fear of heaven, but what would they know about fear of heaven? Because if they make a little indention, right, they move a little bit, maybe it's going to be a nick in the knife. But this animal going to cost you $1,000, $100, what it is. And now there's a question, you might have messed it up. That's going to be a huge financial loss. Got to have fear of heaven. It must be slaughtered. Third thing is, it's got to be slaughtered for Jewish consumption. Fourth thing is, once the animal's been slaughtered properly, you can remove meat from it even when it stopped moving. Sorry, even before it stopped moving. But the reality is, you should probably wait till it's dead. Right? Better to wait till it's dead. But technically, I could cut off a piece, roast it up before it dies. So that'd be okay. Because we hold it's already dead. So if these conditions have been met, then the meat of the animal is permitted for everybody, Jew and non-Jew. So kosher slaughter today, carried out according to all these requirements. Question is there any problem? Does non-kosher industrial slaughter give any problems for Noahides? So if it's kosher slaughter, non-Jew has nothing to worry about. Now, does that mean they have to keep kosher? No. Don't want to be misquoted here. Non-Jew definitely does not have to keep kosher. Eat kosher meat. But it takes away the problem of Eiver min HaChai according to everybody. So it could be, we're going to see, what if a non-Jew wants to hold to a higher standard? Maybe they're allowed to, but not doing it because they want to keep kosher, doing it for another reason. Now, what goes on? Right? Standard procedures we mentioned. Most non-kosher slaughterhouses to stun animals. Right? How do they stun them? Electric shock. What do? They stun them, so then they kill them. Now, what can stunning do? So we hold you can't stun an animal before you slaughter it. 3-day age from Yaakov Yechiel Weinberg, a blessed memory, wrote a whole long response on this. We mentioned before. Just mention one aspect, and that is his conclusion basically is we don't know. It doesn't matter how much juice you give it. Even if you give it a little bit of juice, you shock it, you could destroy certain organs inside. You could destroy the liver. You could destroy, the intestines, other things. You don't need a great amount of shock to do that. Right? So you can't do it. Because he was in Switzerland. They wanted to ban ritual slaughter. They said the only way to ritually slaughter is to stun it. And he looked, high and low to find out, is it permissible, it's not permissible. And basically his conclusion was, you don't know what the shock does to the animal. It could render the animal a treifa. There are 18 signs that make an animal not kosher. Right? Even if it's ritually slaughtered properly. Right? It could have a hole in the brain. It could have a hole in its heart, whatever, missing certain inner organs or outer organs or whatever the case is. So you don't know. So he says we're not sure exactly what it does. Because they saw, after they opened up the animal, they saw that the juice they get, or however much, destroyed certain organs inside. So he said we're not going to do that. That's going to be forbidden. So they didn't have ritual slaughter, and they had to bring in meat because they weren't used to do that. So now they're going to use electric shock before they kill them. Now it may stop the animal from breathing temporarily, but it's not dead. All right, it's still alive, not dead, but it's going to remove the prohibition of a limb torn from a living animal. Right? Why? Because it's basically dead. Basically dead. It's, in other words, it may still breathe a little bit, but it's basically dead. You don't need 100% for the heart to stop, but we understand it's pretty dead over here. Now, most slaughterhouses, they don't necessarily bring about the immediate death of the animal. Meaning, right, what are we looking at? Cessation of cardiac and neuromuscular activity. The heart stops. That's what's going to cause death over here. Let's say before the animal dies, before there's a stop of cardiac activity, and now you cut off part of the animal, you want to eat it, that's a problem. That would be a problem for Noahides. Why? Because the animal effectively would be carved up before it actually died. Now the question is that practical today or not? We're going to see. But basically it's still alive. And if it's still alive, you have the prohibition. This, again, is going to really kill the animal. So in most cases anyway, the meat's going to be forbidden, but you're not going to get capital punishment over here. So according to Dr. Temple Grandin, he was a leading expert on industrial slaughter, the interval between, and this is going to be crucial, the interval between slaughter and processing, right? My assumption, I would agree over here, not knowing anything about ritual slaughter, but my assumption, I have been to a ritual slaughter, so I do know something, right? And that is, once you slaughter the animal, it's going to take a long time, right? Between the slaughter and processing. A long time. Cut up the animal, this, that. So it's going to be rare for an animal's heart to continue beating until the time of processing. That's going to be like almost impossible. Animal's going to die, right? Before that. Now, that is a generalization. May not be true necessarily in smaller slaughterhouses, or let's say specialty slaughterhouses, such as those that produce halal meat. Now, according to the USDA, stunning and slaughter of animals is regulated. Very strictly regulated over here. So there's going to be a time between slaughter and processing. But again, you get to the state level, you get to the federal level, they're not going to apply equally to all sectors. So it could be some sectors might be problematic. And therefore, if you buy regular meat in the store, what's going to happen? It might be Aver Min HaChai. So we'll see. Now, what are the chances of getting Aver Min HaChai meat at your grocery store? Probably pretty slim. So, how are you going to know? You're going to go to the store. You're going to say, is this kosher for Noahide? You're going to say, hey, what's a Noahide? Right? I have no idea. How do you know it's acceptable? How do you know that grocery store is going to be acceptable over here? You know, and how the animal was slaughtered, they're not going to know. Right? Most likely. So you have to find out what the slaughterhouse does. Now, if you're telling me that any amount of Aver Min HaChai is prohibited, even a tiny amount, then maybe you tell me it's not unreasonable that there might be worry over here. There might be real worry that something that was commercially produced could be problematic. Because this is a severe death penalty. This is extremely severe. So by eating, so again, there's going to be a total prohibition, even a slight amount of meat. If it's a slight amount of meat, how can you take a chance? How can you take a chance over here? So if it's been slaughtered according to the laws of Shechita, according to Jewish ritual slaughter, and you rely on what we said above, no questions asked. No issues. But there are a number of leniencies over here, possibly, with buying meats in a regular grocery store. But what are the leniencies going to depend on? Whether or not certain mechanics of Torah law carry over to Noahide. Now this is complex. This is extremely complex. First thing is what we call a suffix. Suffix means a doubt. Cases of doubt. How do you resolve a case of doubts? Right? There are a number of rules. Now these rules, maybe we can rely on the laws of Kashrus to create leniencies for Noahides regarding non-kosher meat. Question's going to be, do these rules apply to non-Jews or not? So there are a number of rabbinical authorities discuss whether they apply to non-Jews or not, to Noahides. There's no consensus. It depends on a number of unresolved questions. Right? We saw what was one of the questions before. Are Noahides obligated to rabbinical law? That's a major question. Second is the concept of suffix d'oraisa l'chumra. There's a concept that if you have a biblical doubt, you have a case over here that might be a Torah prohibition. We're not sure. So what do? We're stringent. If we're not sure, we go stringently over here. That itself is sourced in the Torah, or in rabbinic legislation. The Rambam brings it, others bring it. So rabbinic law, going to be a question. Are Noahides obligated? If it's a matter of Torah law, then Noahides are going to work hard to get around or not partake in anything that's going to make a doubtful transgression. You know why? Because it's a Torah law. It's a Torah prohibition, death penalty here. Right, potentially. If it's rabbinic, so again, the question is going to be whether or not Noahides are bound by rabbinic laws. As we said, extremely complex. Very complex question. Now, it could be by establishing law courts. They're obligated to rabbinic law. But we're going to say over here, just for practical reasons, that Noahides are going to be obligated to rabbinic law applying to mitzvahs that Jews and non-Jews have equal obligation. That are logical for both. So that's one thing. That's one thing where I have a doubt. What about nullification by the majority, what we call rov? Meaning, there's a Talmudic dictum in the laws of Kashrus. If a prohibited item is mixed with a majority of permitted items, let's say you have a whole mixture, permitted things, non-permitted things, we can't distinguish between the two. Then what do? We go according to the majority. If the majority of it is permitted, we nullify it. We nullify it according to the majority. Question's going to be, does this apply? Does this idea of rov, does it apply to non-Jews or not? Right? But again, going according to the majority, there are a number of rabbinic laws and the laws of Kashrus that apply over here. Question is that going to help for Noahide? If it does, all mass-produced meat can be considered a mixture. And if it's a minority of meat, let's say, minority of meat is Aver Min HaChai, not a problem. Why is that a problem? Because it's nullified. What do I mean it's nullified? Nullified means it's like it's not there at all. But I know it's there. 100% you know it's there. But you know what? It gets nullified by the majority because you can't tell where it is. Right? You can't tell where it is even if you know it's there. There's a principle. There's a Kashrus principle that says I can nullify it. I have enough to nullify it over here. It means it's like it's not there at all. Now, there are questions whether we should apply these leniencies. So the question is, okay, so what do you do? What do you do about going, to the regular supermarket? What are you going to do? So each factor in of itself, not enough to permit. Maybe combine, maybe. I could permit with two different things. Right, two different axioms over here. But most contemporary authorities hold you can rely upon them to permit the consumption of regular grocery store meat. Now, let's get to some practical ramifications here. And that is that even if you want to say we have these leniencies, right, there are issues. There are issues. One issue may be who says that Noahide wants to rely on it. Right, there's a stringent option if a Noahide wants to rely on it. We said before, the act of ritual slaughter removes any doubt. A limb taken from a living animal, not a problem. For Jews. Also for non-Jews, not a problem. So non-kosher meat's permitted. Noahide wants to eat it. You got leniencies to rely on. So maybe they want to be extra stringent. They don't want to take any chances. So they only want to eat kosher meat. And that, according to everybody, is not a problem. Right? So in other words, they fulfill their obligation according to everyone. So that might be a better idea. Now you complain. Come on, my butterball turkey is 33 cents a pound. Kosher turkey is like $3 a pound. $4 a pound, if you're lucky. Now, we're not saying you have to do this. That if a person want to be stringent, they could be. Right? They're certainly allowed to. Now, there's a clarification over here. Right? There's a clarification. What's the clarification? First of all, you go to a grocery store, the meat should be 100% okay. Even if you tell me there's a doubt, you're going to have nullification. Also, you're going to have uncertainties whether or not meat from living creatures is even pleasant. Who says a limb from a live animal is going to be present? Right? Who's going to say that? Maybe it's not true. So you got two uncertain factors to permit over here. Now also, even if there are those that are going to question it, a Noahide can add a stringency. They want to be ultra-religious. They can add a stringency to eat meat that's only ritually slaughtered, i.e. kosher meat. Now, why does he make a clarification here? Because what's someone going to say? What's a super duper Noahide going to say over here? See, you can eat kosher meat. See, you miss 45 minutes over here, you take out one line, right? You totally misrepresent. We're saying over here, there's an opportunity if a Noahide wants to be stringent. Doesn't have to be. Person can rely, Noahide can rely on leniencies here. But if they want to be ultra-religious, they don't want to rely on this leniency. They can eat kosher meat. Kosher meat, according to everybody. For Jews and non-Jews, not a problem of Aver Min HaChai. Never be a problem of Aver Min HaChai. Does that mean non-Jews are allowed to keep kosher? That's kind of a foolish conclusion. But obviously they had to put it in here because people came to this conclusion. Right? They see, we can keep kosher over here. That's not what it says. It had nothing to do with this. Why are you gonna consume meat that's kosher? To make sure you have no doubts. You don't have any doubts. Is there an obligation to do that? No. If you want to do it, okay. It's commendable. You can do it. You have no doubts. But there are leniencies you can rely on. You can't say, oh, my dead grandmother wouldn't rely on these leniencies. Why are you telling us to? Because they're legit. They're legitimate leniencies. Because there are a number of doubts over here. But if someone says, I don't want to rely on it, I'm going to be ultra-religious, I'm only going to eat kosher meat, but that in no way says non-Jews have an obligation to keep kosher. That's a huge jump. We're not saying that. This is a specific case. Very specific case. Right? Because the point is, you're not observing the stringency to keep kosher. You're doing it to get rid of the problem of Aver Min HaChai. That's why you're doing it. You're not imitating Jewish practice. That's not called, we said before, weeks ago about Chidushei Das. You're making up a new religion. You're doing things that don't apply. Forget it. They have nothing to do with this. You're doing it because you're adding on a stringency that you don't want to have any doubts. That's why you're doing it. Nothing to do with making up a new religion. Now, what about eating out? If a Noahide is voluntarily strict, they want to only eat ritually slaughtered meats. What about eating out? What do you want to eat in a non-kosher place? Non-kosher restaurants are going to use their utensils and equipment, right, for regular grocery store meats. So are you allowed? Would be a Noahide be allowed to eat that meat if they take it on the stringency? Right? So what are they going to be worried about also? Flavor of non-kosher. What does that mean? Doesn't mean non-kosher ingredients per se. Because again, they don't have an obligation. What does it mean? Aver Min HaChai. Right? That's what it means. Maybe the meat absorbed in the vessel. Right? You cook meat. What does it do? You cook it in the pot, you cook it in the pan, whatever it is, that meat absorbs into the walls. Now, if a Jew had a kosher pot, he puts in non-kosher meat, he heats it up. The meat cooks, that pot has to be kosher, you can't eat the meat, you got to throw out the meat. And anything that was mixed in the meat. If you had potatoes, onions, whatever, you throw the whole thing out. If you took that mixture, put into another pot, you also mess it up. In another pot, you also mess it up forever. Why? Because it's got non-kosher taste over here. So therefore, if you have non-kosher taste in the pots, now I got a problem. Why? How can I eat from the pot? The pot has Aver Min HaChai, in the walls. It's absorbed in the walls. So if that's the case, how can you eat anything that's cooked in that pot? Now, you're going to say, Ma Kesher, what's the connection here? Do these dietary laws apply to non-Jews? I would think not. Right? That should only apply to Jews. Now, the question is, I would say this should never apply to non-Jews. Why in the world would this apply to non-Jews? Doesn't apply to them. Right? But that's the question. Comes on the Chasam Sofer. And the Chasam Sofer says, in his response in Yoreh De'ah, number 19, at the very end, he says, pots and utensils have been certainly used for Aver Min HaChai, may never be used by non-Jews. He's ultra stringent. He says the same thing applies for Jews as it does to non-Jews over here. In other words, the Aver Min HaChai that's cooked in the pot, the non-Jews can't eat from that pot. That's an ultra stringent, right? Unbelievably stringent here. Comes on the Darchei Tshuva. Chapter 62, or response to 62, paragraph 5. And he says, he himself and many other rabbinic authorities hold no such thing, no such prohibition for Noahides. Because even if previous utensils were used for Avram min HaChai, no problem. It doesn't apply to them. Now, what are you going to say? What about a Noahide who wants to be stringent and only eats meat slaughtered according to Jewish ritual practice? So they can rely on the Darkei Tshuva. They can rely on these other rabbinic authorities who permit it. They can permit it being cooked in a pot that have been used with Avram min HaChai. Not a problem. And what are they relying on? They're relying on a solid permissive ruling combined with a number of other leniencies. So there are a huge amount of leniencies here. Someone says, I still want to be ultimate, stringent over here. I want to be totally stringent here. Okay. But there are a lot of leniencies you can rely on. You don't have to be. You don't have to be. A lot of leniencies. Now, what this means is, even though Noahide accepted such a stringency, they can eat out in restaurants that serve regular meats. Right? In other words, they're not allowed to eat any foods containing actual meat in the restaurant. That would be a problem. And again, the pots that are cooked that meat in, that wouldn't apply. So they eat fish. They eat fish out. They eat shrimp out. And they're cooked in a meat pot that was used for Avram min HaChai. Is it a problem? Not a problem. Totally not a problem because we got a permissive ruling here. Major permissive ruling. Again, it's only those who accepted a stringency, right? Such a stringency. But again, it's not required or expected. Person wants to, they're allowed to, right? But, no obligation. The last thing here is, what about eggs and milk? You gotta say, what about it? Now, eggs and milk should also be considered the prohibition of Avram min HaChai, right? As the Gemara Bechor says, 6b to 7a, etc. Why? Because it's separated from the animal while it's alive. So you gotta say, but is that really a limb? Is it considered a limb over here? But certainly not a problem for Jews. Why? Because the Torah says explicitly, I can eat eggs and milk. Right? Because it's brought down many times in the Torah says that the land of Israel is a land flowing with milk and honey. Gee, it'd be kind of funny if milk was forbidden. We're going to say milk's forbidden. What do you mean? Doesn't the Torah tell me a whole bunch of times in milk and honey? So what's the problem? So if you're praising Israel with milk in the verse, then we're permitting milk. So therefore, it's not a problem of Avram min HaChai. Right? That wouldn't be a problem. Torah also states, if you chance upon a bird's nest on your way, in a tree or on the ground, you have young ones or eggs, and the mother sitting upon the young, or the eggs, what do? You don't take the mother with the young. What do? Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 6. You push away the bird. Right? Some people say, it's an act of cruelty. It's a gezerah, it's a decree. Right? You push away the mother bird. And you take the eggs. Now, what does that mean? The eggs are really attached to the mother bird. Tell me not literally the mother bird sitting on it, but since the mother bird is considered releasing the eggs, that's not a problem. That's not called Avram min HaChai. Right? That's definitely not called Avram min HaChai. Now, who does that apply to? These verses only given to the Jewish people. Nothing to do with Noahides. So Noahides still prohibited from eating eggs and milk. Right? Nearly all rabbinical authorities agree milk and eggs are permitted for Noahides. Now, it could be reasons are different. So even though the Chasam Sofer came along and he said, certain eggs may be prohibited, right? They may be prohibited over here. Just about everybody else disagrees. Right? And virtually all rabbinic authorities hold milk for Noahides is okay. Right? Eggs as well. So we don't have a problem. Right? Rabbi Shlomo Kluger, one of the great Torah giants, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, brings a proof from none other than Abraham, who served dairy to his guests. Boy, Abraham wasn't necessarily considered Jewish, even though Talmud says he kept the Torah before it was given, and Isaac did, and Jacob did, whatever that means. But if it would be forbidden, right? These non-Jews came. They were, angels dressed up as Arabs, so to speak. They came to see him, to tell him different things. Whatever it was, what did he give them? Dairy. Boy, these non-Jews are the Noahides. Why is he feeding them dairy? Obviously permitted. Right? So, this is not so simple, this whole thing. And, people could take on the stringency. They could say, I only want ritual slaughter. Right? But there are a number of leniencies. Right? A number of leniencies over here. But it's complex. Right? It's complex. If these Kashrus axioms, as we're going to call them, do they apply to non-Jews or not? That is a huge question, not a small question. It's a big question. And they're complicated. Just for Jews, for goodness sakes, they're complicated. If they're complicated for Jews, you don't think they're complicated for non-Jews? The question is going to be, does that apply or not? So I would have said for sure it doesn't apply. These are rabbinic. It should only apply to Jews. So there are those that hold that it might apply. Right? But there's a major question here. Right? The major question is, we said before, are Noahides obligated to rabbinic law? Some people say they can do what they want. Yeah, good luck. It's complicated. Extremely complicated. If it's Torah law, then I can understand. Noahide's going to be stringent over here. Makes sense. Right? They don't want to have they don't want to transgress at all. Because even if they eat a little bit, they're gonna die for it. Right? They're going to get death penalty over here. So then I can understand Torah prohibition. If it's rabbinic, who says rabbinic prohibitions apply? That is a whole question in and of itself. Yeah. So any questions on that? The liability, what's considered the life of an animal, getting rid of the prohibition, kosher, non-kosher slaughter, leniencies, practical advice, eating out, all that. Any questions? Any questions on any of that?
Hi, Rabbi. I'm sorry. I don't have a way to get to my keyboard.
No problem. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I remember hearing technically that, as the last class as I remember, the prohibition of blood definitely does not apply to Noahides.
Okay.
All right. So with eggs, I also remember hearing somewhere that with Jews, they usually inspect the egg through a light
for blood spots.
Right. So would it be safe to assume that the blood spots don't really matter for Noahides?
That's probably a good assumption.
Okay.
That's probably a good assumption. That's a question. Does eating blood, does eating bloods in general apply to Noahides? Because we hold by Jews it's forbidden. Why? Because you're eating the flesh. It's like you're eating the soul of the animal. That doesn't apply to non-Jews. Right? In other words, the soul of the animal doesn't affect the non-Jew. Right? If you look at Leviticus chapter 1, great commentaries there, says, it talks about the laws of Kashrus, kosher animals, non-kosher animals. So this commentary says, a non-Jew is never going to, you see that they eat all kinds of things. Creepy crawly things, whatever, all kinds of things. Go to the Far East, anything that moves. Anything that moves, they'll eat. Right? Give or take. So, but you see, it doesn't affect them in a negative way. Maybe except for the bats in Wuhan or whatever. But, okay, let's say it doesn't affect in a negative way. If it doesn't affect them in a negative way, see, this would be my checkmate answer to super Noahides who want to keep kosher, that the commentary over here says, if it doesn't affect them in a negative way, a Noahide's not going to do something for nothing. It doesn't affect them. For a Jew, it could cause them to be apathetic. It can have an effect on their soul. It doesn't affect a non-Jew. Right? So this commentary says, if it's not going to affect a non-Jew, why do it? It doesn't do anything. There's no practical benefit. None. Right? No, but I feel closer to God. Repeat after me. There's no practical benefit. None. It doesn't affect you whatsoever. It's like taking You think you're taking medicine, whatever, it's a placebo. What does a placebo do? Nothing. You think it might affect you, this, that, but it's nothing. It's all sugar and water. So why does a non-Jew want to do it? Why will some non-Jews want to do it? Because they want to have that connection. They want to feel like, they're connected, but it doesn't apply to them. Right? Totally doesn't apply to them. So I would say blood shouldn't be an issue. Why shouldn't it be, why should blood be an issue? Non-Jews can eat whatever they want. They don't have to ritually slaughter. Their prohibition is Aver Min HaChai. That's the prohibition. It's all about eating blood. That's nothing. That's a different thing altogether. They have nothing to do with this. Right? So the question is, if it doesn't affect them, then it doesn't matter. Right? Then, most non-kosher meat, there probably is some blood in it. What do Jews do? That's why it's so expensive. What do Jews do? They take the chicken, they take the, they take the cow meat, whatever, they put it in water, ice cold water. They get rid of all the blood. And what do? They put it in a ton of salt. So if you ever had kosher meat, what's one of the main differences besides price in kosher meat? It's extremely salty. Why is it extremely salty? To make sure there's no blood. Now, it's hard to imagine it's going to be blood anyway, the way they do it. But they're not taking any chance. They're going to put it in tons and tons and tons of salt. That shouldn't apply to a non-Jew. Totally shouldn't apply to a non-Jew. Because it doesn't affect them the same way. Yeah. Any other, I hope that answers the question. Any other questions?
Yes. Another question is, I'm a substitute teacher. So when I go to teach another teacher in another teacher's classroom, sometimes their supplies, I think some teachers, they buy their own supplies.
Okay.
So I'm always hesitant to use, like, say, I don't know, staples or paper clips. And I thought I heard somewhere, I think I might be mistaken, but I thought I heard somewhere that for a Jew, it would not be forbidden to take like a single paper clip, but for a non-Jew it would, and it doesn't, on the face of it.
You mean stealing? That's what you're talking about? Yeah. Yeah. So the difference in stealing between a Jew and a non-Jew, we're gonna speak about it, is that a Jew, you have to steal something of value. Now, what's something considered of value? It's what we call at least the value of a pruta. What's the value of a pruta today? Probably about 10 cents, maybe. Something like that. It has to be some value. If a non-Jew stole a penny, stole half a penny, something of that doesn't seem to be of any value, they're going to still be liable for stealing. You're going to say, what's the difference? Well, what's the difference over here? So we're going to have to see. But a non-Jew, the Gemara says that, if a Jew's ox gores a non-Jew's ox, he's exempt. But if a non-Jew, his ox gores your ox, he's liable. Now, you're going to be liable anyway for different reasons. A Jew's going to be liable anyway, but why? Why is it, that sounds discriminatory. I spoke a number of weeks ago on quote-unquote discriminatory things said against non-Jews in the Talmud, which I did on Tanakh Talk. But what's the reason the Gemara gives? Because why is their money ownerless? Their money is considered ownerless, and therefore a Jew's going to be exempt over here because they didn't uphold the Noahide laws. I got a lot of flack for saying that, but that's what the Gemara says. Since way back when they didn't hold by the Noahide laws, so technically their money, look what they did over here. They didn't hold universal laws, so their money becomes ownerless over here. So too, that even a minimal amount. Similar thing over here. You could have asked over here. Aver Min HaChai, why is it a tiny amount? Why not a significant amount? Right? Because once you eat it, you transgress. Right? It doesn't have to be a huge amount. Right? It doesn't have to be the size of let's say the volume of an olive, or the volume of an egg. Let's say something more significant. Because over here, what's being done is so bad that you're liable for a death penalty, even the smallest amount, you're going to be liable. That's what I would answer. But whatever, we're gonna see. We're gonna see money laws. We're gonna see how these money laws apply. But that's what I would say off the cuff. Yeah. Any other questions?
I do have.
Go ahead. You got the mic. All yours.
Thank you, Rabbi. I have another question, but I think I might need to email, just because if loved ones were to hear me, or to see, to see something they wouldn't understand.
I get you. I got you.
Yeah. Even if they became Noahides, and if they weren't.
That's why a lot of stories I might tell, in some of my classes, when I don't say it's family members, I'll change it so no one will recognize the story anyway. But it doesn't matter. No one in my family is going to listen to classes anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But no, I definitely hear you want to protect the innocent. That or the so-called guilty minus being innocent. I don't know. Yeah, email me, not a problem.
Okay.
I have a little more time in my hands next couple of weeks because I'm off from my other stuff till for another couple of weeks to the beginning of the month of Elul. So email away. Yeah. Any other questions? Good. I'm going to stop here. We'll continue, I guess, with this next week. Anyone has any questions, feel free. You can email me. Otherwise, I'm going to sign out. Whichever one is good, middle of the day or almost end of the day for me. Have a great rest of the week.